Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and we had a general election yesterday, and it's gone very badly indeed. And there's going to be a number of videos. Of course, it's quite momentous. We've not just seen the Conservative win. I mean, we've got to bear in mind all the way through this that was the prediction. They've won fairly big. The first thing that started to happen was in the exit poll, which was predicting a massive majority. At the point at which I'm doing this, not all of the results are through yet. It doesn't quite look like it will be as big, but it is still a very hefty majority. I mean, essentially, just to go through quickly, because there's no point in dwelling on this anymore, the best case scenario was always that the Parliament ends up pretty much what it was like before we dissolve for this general election. At which point you might think to yourself quite reasonably, well, hang on a minute, why did the opposition parties support this general election if the best they could hope for was the same? Largely because they're stupid. Ultimately, that is seriously it. It was never on the cards for, say, Labour to get a majority. It was never on the cards for anything other than a mix of the SNP, Labour and the Lib Dems to get a majority. The best they could really hope for was that some of the Conservatives that were purged would turn into Liberal Democrat or Labour seats. Whereas on the other hand, they were really risking an actual realistic majority for the Conservatives. It was madness. And all of the party leaders are complicit in this. So the Liberal Democrats and the SNP are complicit in this because they are the ones who supported Boris Johnson's general election bill. Labour sort of did on the day when it went through to the vote, but that was only because it was going to happen anyway. They'd actually opposed it. It was going to happen anyway. They had to then say that they were supporting it because otherwise they looked scared for the general election. Now, that being said, at that point, if you'd not seen me before, you'd be thinking, bloody hell, you're making excuses for Jeremy Corbyn. Well, you're not. No, I'm not. The person chiefly to blame for all of this is Jeremy Corbyn. It's not even Boris Johnson, because at the end of the day, think about it this way, Boris Johnson is just doing what his party demanded he do. The only person that was going to become the leader of the Conservative Party and the Prime Minister after Theresa May had gone was someone who could guarantee that Brexit was going to go through, that we were going to leave the EU and that we were going to do it in fairly short order. So Boris Johnson was simply complying with his party. That's not to absolve him of blame because he's an evil little shit, but there we go. But Jeremy Corbyn was adopting his policy against the wishes of the party, as is exemplified by the fact that his core voters have deserted him. There's going to be some interesting statistics come through this in the next few days, but one of them that has emerged immediately is that when you look in seats where Labour won them in 2017 but have been losing them now, what's notable is a sharp declining turnout, much more so than in other seats. What has essentially happened is there's Labour voters, people who would like to vote Labour, they haven't turned out to vote for the Conservatives. They've not been like some of the ones that have. I mean, there's been many traditional Labour voters who have turned out and voted for the Conservatives. I mean, that's a topic in itself. What these people have done is, well, of course they can't vote for the Conservatives. They certainly can't vote for Boris Johnson. But they haven't wanted to vote for Jeremy Corbyn either. And that has been the bottom line. It's got nothing to do with the Labour policies. It's got nothing to do with Jeremy Corbyn's policies. It's entirely to do with him. He has been the problem. It's been obvious for some time and people have kept saying to me, oh no, you'll be fine. They're going to win. They're going to win. They haven't won. They've lost badly. They've lost. The full results are not in yet. There's every chance he's lost worse than Michael Foot, who was the worst Labour leader in history. The worst. Ever. And some Labour leaders never won a general election. Well, neither did Michael Foot. But he was still worse. Jeremy Corbyn looks set to become worse than everyone because it was a completely open goal. No Labour leader has ever been faced with such a weak Conservative Party, such a fractious Conservative Party. before. It was an open goal. Even Ed Miliband, who bless him, at least he stood down. He had the decency to stand down when it became obvious he wasn't up to the job. He would have walked this. Absolutely walked it. I can't imagine how easy it would have been for a really good leader. Someone, when I say a good leader, I mean someone who is effective at campaigning. It's an absolute shower. Jeremy Corbyn could have stopped Boris Johnson becoming Prime Minister in the first place. All he had to do was get behind a compromise candidate, but he insisted he be the Prime Minister. Sorry, you ain't got a majority. No, that wasn't on the cards. He didn't have the power to do that. He did have the power to replace Boris Johnson. He didn't. When Boris Johnson started behaving extremely badly, he could have got rid of him then. He could have gone, right, do you know what? This has gone on long enough. We need to get rid of him. Should we back Caroline Lucas? That was my plan. That was my idea. Compromise candidate there. That way he's not supporting a moderate Conservative. I understand that. He's not supporting a moderate Labour MP because that undermines him. I get that. He's not supporting a Lib Dem. He's supporting someone who is an MP of one party in Parliament. That would have been the easy thing to do. Even at the point, even though I say Swinson and Blackford were complicit with this general election because they helped Boris Johnson get it. He didn't have the majority to get that through. They gave him that majority. It's still Jeremy Corbyn ultimately at fault because at that point he could have said, look, this is a disaster. Why are we giving them even the chance of getting a majority? I'll go for the compromise candidate. He tried to get himself into number 10. It didn't work. At that point, you just go, look, we cannot enable a Conservative government. And this is the most right-wing of all Conservative governments in modern times. But again, that is a subject for another video as well. Where does this leave us at the moment? Well, the SNP are doing rather well, as expected. And ultimately, this is going to raise the question of Scottish independence. In fact, it's not even a question. Well, the question is when, not so much if now. Northern Ireland, of course, is going to reunify with Ireland at some point. Now, a lot of people are going to be going, oh, well, it might as well be tomorrow. No, these things are still not going to be that quick, but they are now inevitable. With Northern Ireland, of course, it's going to be inevitable because there's going to be a border up the Irish Sea, despite what Boris Johnson says. The actual official report says, of course, there's going to be checks. Of course, there's going to be checks. That means Northern Ireland's going to be perfectly well aligned with the Republic of Ireland and increasingly divergent from Great Britain. Reunification is going to happen. I think that was always inevitable anyway. It's just going to happen more quickly now. With Scotland, that was not inevitable. I thought the damage may have already been done regardless of what happened with the general election results. But it is now certain. And the SNP doing rather well. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a nationalist party. If you're voting for the SNP, you are voting for independence for Scotland. Them winning a right load of seats shows support for their central plank. It's obvious. But I am opposed to the breakup of the union, but there should be another Scottish referendum. You can't deny that. There are 4 reasons I have for that, but that's going to be a video in itself as well. But there's also going to be some complexity to it as well. This result is not good for Scottish nationalists either. That being said, it depends how patient you are. If you're a bit patient, then I guess it is. But and because that's huge, that's one of the biggest things to come out of this result. I'll definitely be covering that this weekend, possibly tomorrow. In fact, probably tomorrow. Where else it leaves us? So Jeremy Corbyn himself, I always said, if he steps down, then that's no consolation to me. He literally couldn't do any more damage by remaining in post. He can't do more damage. He has achieved one thing in politics. In half a century of politics, he has now achieved one thing. He has delivered unto the country a massive majority, the like of which I can barely remember. I can just about. For the most right-wing Conservative government that has ever existed in modern times. Certainly in my lifetime. Much more so than Margaret Thatcher. And that's his legacy. That is going to be his legacy. Now, I have heard that he said he's not going to lead the party into another campaign. Given that the next campaign will be in 5 years, that's still not as good as I'm going to step down right now. That, to me, sounds like He's still got work to do on the Labour Party to get his claws into it, to ensure that he gets to pick his successor. No, that's not how it should go. He has failed badly. He cannot have any hand in his successor, and neither can his acolytes, and neither can his cronies. I'm sorry if you were a fan of Corbyn, and I'm sorry if you thought his treatment was unfair. We're just going to have to disagree on that one. But he is the reason, undeniably the reason for this. And if the party tries at all to install a leader that is in any way in his shadow, just as he was in Michael Foot's shadow, previously the worst Labour leader ever, we are putting the Conservatives and the extreme right-wing Conservatives in power for another decade. A generation. We're going to see a full generation having grown up into adulthood during Conservative reign. We cannot have that. It's bad enough. The next 5 years is going to be absolutely appalling. Again, more topics for other videos. In the meantime, check out the video I did last week on what's on page 48 of the Conservative manifesto if you want a sneak peek at what's happening in the next 5 years. But anyway, that's the fallout of the results, my initial thoughts on it. There will be more coming, another one today, more over the weekend, and then more inevitably next week. So I hope you found the video interesting. If appalling, I did certainly. If you'd like to click the like button, then that would be brilliant as well. And also, if you'd like to support the channel before Boris Johnson makes it illegal, then please click on the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.